Tonight's story was sent to me by Ethan Carter from Montana. Ethan told me this happened to his older sister Rachel during the fall of 2017. Even now nobody in his family likes talking about it, because none of them can explain what really happened. At the time Rachel was 28 years old and 6 months pregnant with her first child. She lived with her husband Mason in a small town near the Bitterroot Mountains in western Montana. Rachel's pregnancy had been completely normal. She was healthy, the baby was healthy, and the family was excited for the arrival of their first child. One weekend Rachel and Mason decided to take a short trip into the mountains. Nothing unusual, just a peaceful drive to enjoy the fall colors before winter arrived. The weather was perfect that morning. The sky was clear, the roads were quiet, and everything felt normal. Around noon they reached an old scenic area that overlooked a deep valley. A few tourists were taking pictures, families were walking around, and there was nothing strange about the place. After spending some time there they continued driving deeper into the mountains. The farther they went, the fewer people they saw. Soon they were completely alone, miles away from the nearest town. Eventually they found an abandoned fire lookout trail. The trail was no longer maintained, but it was still open to visitors. Rachel wanted to stretch her legs for a few minutes, so Mason parked the truck and they started walking. The forest was unusually quiet. No birds, no insects, no wind, just silence. Rachel noticed it almost immediately, but Mason didn't seem concerned. About 15 minutes into the walk Rachel suddenly stopped. She thought she heard someone call her name. Rachel. The voice sounded distant, almost like it was coming from somewhere deep in the trees. She turned around expecting to see another hiker, but nobody was there. Mason asked what was wrong. Rachel laughed and said she thought she heard something. They continued walking. A few minutes later it happened again. Rachel. This time the voice sounded closer, much closer. Rachel froze. The voice sounded exactly like her mother. The problem was her mother lived over 1,000 miles away in Ohio. Mason hadn't heard anything. He told Rachel it was probably an echo or her imagination. Rachel agreed, but she couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching them. When they finally reached the old lookout tower they discovered something strange. The tower itself was gone. Only the concrete foundation remained. But standing in the middle of it was an old wooden chair. A single chair, facing the forest. It looked completely out of place, as if someone had carried it all the way up the mountain. Rachel felt uncomfortable the moment she saw it. For some reason she couldn't stop staring at it. Then she heard the voice again. Rachel. This time it came from directly behind her, and it sounded exactly like her own voice. Not her mother's, not a stranger's, her own. Rachel spun around. Nobody was there. The forest behind them was empty, but for a brief second, she thought she saw something moving between the trees. Something tall, something pale, watching them, and then it disappeared. Mason immediately suggested leaving. Rachel agreed without hesitation. As they walked back toward the truck, neither of them noticed that a second set of footprints had appeared in the mud behind them, following every step they took, and stopping whenever they stopped. The drive home should have taken less than 3 hours. Instead it felt much longer. Rachel spent most of the trip staring out the passenger window. She couldn't stop thinking about the voice. At first she tried convincing herself that it had been her imagination, but one detail kept bothering her. The final voice had sounded exactly like her. Not similar, not close, exactly like her. That night Rachel had trouble sleeping. Every time she closed her eyes she saw the old wooden chair standing alone in the mountains, waiting, watching. Around 2 in the morning she woke up suddenly. Her heart was racing. For a moment she didn't know why. Then she heard it. A faint knocking sound. 3 slow knocks, coming from somewhere inside the house. Rachel sat up in bed. Beside her Mason was asleep. The knocking came again. 3 knocks. Slow and deliberate. Rachel quietly got out of bed. She checked the hallway. Nothing. She checked the front door. Locked. The back door. Locked. Every window was secure. Eventually the sound stopped, and Rachel convinced herself it had probably been the house settling. The next morning everything seemed normal, until she walked into the kitchen. There on the refrigerator was a note, written in black marker. Come back. Rachel stared at it in confusion. She immediately assumed Mason was playing some kind of joke, but when she asked him about it, his expression turned serious. He swore he had never written it. The handwriting wasn't his, and it wasn't Rachel's either. Mason crumpled the note and threw it away. Neither of them mentioned it again. But over the next few days strange things continued happening. Rachel began hearing footsteps upstairs during the afternoon, even when nobody else was home. At night she sometimes heard faint movement outside the bedroom door. Slow footsteps, back and forth, as though someone was pacing in the hallway. Whenever she opened the door, the hallway was empty. Then came the dreams. Every night Rachel dreamed about the mountains. She always found herself standing on the old concrete foundation, and every time the wooden chair was waiting for her, facing the trees. In the dream she could never see who was sitting in it, only the back of their head, long pale hair hanging down over the chair. Then the figure would slowly raise one hand, point toward the forest, and whisper, "Come closer." Each night the dream became more vivid, more real. Then one morning Rachel woke up and found dirt covering her bare feet, dark mountain soil, the same reddish dirt that had covered the trail. Rachel stood frozen beside the bed. She hadn't left the house. She knew she hadn't. Yet somehow the dirt was there, as if she had spent the entire night walking outside. That evening Mason returned home from work and immediately noticed something strange. Rachel was standing in the backyard, completely still, facing the woods behind their property. She wasn't moving, wasn't speaking, wasn't blinking. Mason called her name twice. No response. Only when he physically touched her shoulder did she suddenly snap out of it. Rachel looked confused, almost frightened. Then she asked a question that made Mason's blood run cold. "Did you see the woman too?" Mason asked what woman she was talking about. Rachel slowly pointed toward the trees, but there was nobody there. Only darkness beginning to settle between the branches. Still, Rachel couldn't shake the feeling, because she was certain someone had been standing there, watching her. The same pale figure she thought she had seen in the mountains. And for the first time, Rachel began wondering if whatever she had heard on that trail had never really stayed behind. Over the next week Rachel became someone her family barely recognized. She was still herself most of the time. She laughed. She talked normally. She went about her day. But every now and then something changed. Her attention would suddenly drift toward empty spaces, corners of rooms, dark windows, hallways, places where nobody was standing. Sometimes she would stare for several minutes without speaking, as though she was listening to someone. One evening Mason found her sitting alone at the dining table. The lights were off. The room was dark. Rachel was smiling, quietly nodding her head, as if she were having a conversation. When Mason turned on the light she jumped in her seat. The smile instantly disappeared. She looked embarrassed. When he asked who she was talking to, Rachel simply said, "Nobody." But Mason knew she was lying. A few days later Rachel visited her doctor for a routine checkup. Everything appeared normal. The baby was healthy. The heartbeat was strong. The doctor found nothing concerning. Rachel felt relieved, until she was leaving the examination room. As she walked past the nurse's station, an elderly nurse suddenly grabbed her wrist. The woman looked terrified. She stared directly at Rachel's stomach. Then she whispered, "You need to be careful." Rachel frowned. The nurse glanced around before continuing. "I don't know what is following you, but it shouldn't be here." Before Rachel could ask what she meant, another nurse called the woman away. The moment was over, but the warning stayed with her. That night Rachel finally told Mason everything. The voices, the dreams, the woman in the woods, the strange feeling that someone was constantly nearby. Mason listened carefully. Though he clearly didn't believe in anything supernatural, he could see how frightened Rachel had become. He promised her they would figure it out together. For the first time in days Rachel felt slightly better. Then came the night that changed everything. Around 3 in the morning Rachel woke to the sound of footsteps, not outside the bedroom. Inside it, slow footsteps moving across the floor. Rachel immediately sat upright. The room was dark, but moonlight entered through the window. Enough to see shapes, enough to see movement. At first she thought Mason was walking around. Then she realized Mason was asleep beside her. The footsteps stopped. Rachel held her breath. The room became silent. Then she noticed something near the bedroom door. A figure, tall, motionless, standing in the darkness, watching her. Rachel couldn't make out a face, only a pale outline, and long hair hanging down. For several seconds neither of them moved. Rachel tried waking Mason, but her body refused to cooperate. Fear had frozen her in place. The figure slowly raised one arm, then pointed toward her stomach. Rachel felt an instant wave of panic. The baby suddenly kicked harder than ever before, hard enough to hurt. Rachel gasped, and the moment she made a sound, the figure vanished, gone, as if it had never existed. Mason woke up from her scream. He turned on the light. The room was empty, but Rachel was crying, shaking uncontrollably. The next morning things became even stranger, because when Rachel checked her phone, she found a photograph she didn't remember taking. A photograph captured at exactly 3:07 a.m. The image showed her bedroom door, and standing beside it, barely visible in the darkness, was the silhouette of a woman, with pale skin, long hair, and eyes reflecting the camera flash, like an animal staring back from the dark. For the first time, Mason had no explanation, and deep down, Both of them knew something was getting closer. The photograph changed everything. Until that moment, Mason had been searching for logical explanations. Stress, lack of sleep, pregnancy complications, anything that could explain what Rachel was experiencing. But neither of them could explain the figure captured in the photo. The following weekend, Mason decided to return to the mountain trail. Rachel wanted to go with him, but he refused. Something about the place no longer felt right. He drove there alone early Saturday morning. The trail looked exactly as they remembered. The same trees, the same silence, the same abandoned path leading deeper into the forest. As he walked toward the old lookout site, he noticed something strange. There were no animal sounds. No birds, no insects, nothing. The entire forest felt dead. When he finally reached the concrete foundation, the wooden chair was gone. Only empty ground remained. Mason searched the area for nearly an hour. Then he found something half buried beneath a layer of leaves. A metal plaque, old and badly rusted. Most of the writing had faded away, but one sentence was still readable. Authorized access only. Project Echo. Mason had never heard of it. Later that day, he visited the local library hoping to learn more. At first he found nothing. Then an elderly librarian recognized the name. Her expression immediately changed. She quietly told him that decades earlier there had been rumors about a government research station hidden somewhere in those mountains. Nobody knew exactly what happened there. According to local stories, the facility studied unusual radio frequencies, signals that seemed to appear from nowhere, signals nobody could identify. Eventually the project was shut down, the buildings were demolished, and the area was abandoned. When Mason asked why, the librarian hesitated. Then she told him something that made his stomach turn. Several workers reportedly vanished during the final months of the project. Not one or two, multiple people. Their bodies were never found. And before they disappeared, many of them claimed they were hearing voices. Voices that sounded exactly like people they knew. Family members, friends, sometimes even themselves. Mason felt cold. The story sounded far too familiar. When he returned home, Rachel was sitting quietly in the living room. She looked exhausted. Her skin was pale. Dark circles had formed beneath her eyes. Then she told him something she had never mentioned before. The voice wasn't only calling her name anymore. Now it was speaking in full sentences. Mason felt his heart sink. He asked what it was saying. Rachel stared at the floor for several seconds, then answered, "It keeps saying the baby belongs with us." A chill moved through the room. For the rest of the evening, neither of them spoke much. That night things became worse. Shortly after midnight, every electronic device inside the house suddenly activated. The television turned on by itself. The radio began blasting static. Rachel's phone lit up. Even the baby monitor they had recently purchased started making noise. A strange, distorted sound, almost like dozens of people whispering at once. Mason rushed to unplug everything, but the sound continued. The whispers were coming from the monitor, even though it wasn't connected to power. Then through the static, a single voice became clear. A woman's voice, soft and distant. Rachel immediately recognized it. It was the same voice from the mountains. The voice spoke only for words. "We're almost there now." The monitor instantly went silent. And at that exact moment, a violent crash echoed from upstairs, as if something heavy had fallen inside the nursery. Both of them froze, because neither of them had gone upstairs all night. Yet someone, or something, was already inside the room waiting for their child. Mason grabbed a flashlight from the kitchen and rushed upstairs. Rachel followed close behind despite his protests. The nursery door was half open. Neither of them remembered leaving it that way. The room was dark, completely silent. Mason slowly pushed the door open. The moment his flashlight entered the room, both of them stopped. The crib had moved. Earlier that day it had been positioned against the far wall. Now it sat directly in the center of the room, perfectly aligned with the window, as though someone had carefully placed it there. Rachel felt her stomach tighten. Then she noticed something on the floor. Mud. Fresh mud, leading from the window to the crib. A trail of footprints. Small footprints. Bare feet. Neither of them spoke. Mason immediately checked the window. Locked. No signs of forced entry. Nothing. The footprints simply appeared inside the room, and ended beside the crib. That was when Rachel heard the whisper again. This time much closer. Almost against her ear. "We're waiting." Rachel spun around. Nobody was there. But the baby suddenly kicked hard enough to make her gasp. The same thing had happened in the bedroom. The same violent reaction, as if the baby could sense the presence too. The next morning, Mason called every local historian he could find. Eventually, one elderly man agreed to meet him. The man had spent decades researching forgotten events in the Bitterroot Mountains. When Mason mentioned Project Echo, The man's face immediately lost color. For several seconds he simply stared at him. Then he asked one question. Has someone been calling your wife's name? Mason nodded. The old man slowly sat down. Then he revealed something that had never appeared in any newspaper. Near the end of Project Echo, researchers became obsessed with the strange signal they were receiving from deep underground. Nobody could identify its source. Yet everyone who listened to it reported the same thing. The signal seemed intelligent. It adapted. It learned it. And eventually it began imitating voices. At first workers heard family members. Then they heard themselves. Soon many employees became convinced someone was speaking directly to them. Several disappeared after following the voices into the forest. None ever returned. But one case stood out from all the others. A pregnant woman working at the facility vanished shortly before the project was shut down. According to witnesses, she became obsessed with a voice she claimed was speaking to her unborn child. The old man looked directly at Mason, then quietly said, "They never found her, or the baby." That night Rachel's condition worsened dramatically. She began sleepwalking. Just after 2 in the morning Mason woke up and found her missing. Panic hit instantly. He searched the entire house, then looked outside. Rachel was standing at the edge of the woods behind their property, barefoot, motionless, facing the darkness. Mason ran toward her. As he approached he heard something that made his blood freeze. Rachel wasn't alone. Someone was speaking to her. A woman's voice, soft, calm, patient, but there was nobody there. Only darkness between the trees. Then Rachel slowly raised one hand and pointed into the forest. Mason followed her gaze. For a split second he saw them. Dozens of pale figures standing silently among the trees, watching, waiting, and every single one of them had the same face. The face from the photograph. The face Rachel kept seeing. Then they vanished, as if they had never been there. Mason grabbed Rachel and rushed her back inside. But deep down he knew something terrifying. Whatever had started in those mountains was almost finished, and whoever wanted their child was no longer hiding. Mason barely slept for the rest of the night. He stayed awake watching Rachel, watching the windows, watching the dark tree line beyond their property. By sunrise he had made a decision. They couldn't stay there anymore. Whatever had attached itself to Rachel in the mountains was becoming stronger, and it seemed to be focused on one thing, their unborn child. That afternoon they packed their essentials and left town. Their destination was a small cabin owned by Mason's uncle nearly 200 miles away in eastern Montana. No forests nearby, no mountains, no connection to the place where everything started. For the first few hours Rachel actually seemed better. The voices stopped, the strange behavior faded, and for the first time in weeks she smiled. Mason finally felt hope. Maybe distance was enough. Maybe whatever had followed them couldn't go any farther. But shortly after sunset Rachel suddenly became silent. She stared out the truck window, her expression empty. Mason asked if she was okay. Rachel slowly turned toward him and spoke in a voice that wasn't hers. "You can't take her away." Mason nearly drove off the road. Rachel immediately blinked and looked confused, as if she had no memory of speaking. Neither of them said another word. They arrived at the cabin after dark. The place was isolated, surrounded by open land. No trees, no mountains, no neighbors, nothing. That night Mason locked every door and window. Then he sat beside Rachel until she fell asleep. Around 3 in the morning he woke to a strange sound, a low humming noise, almost like radio interference. At first he thought it was coming from outside. Then he realized it was coming from inside the cabin. The sound grew louder, and louder, and louder, until the walls themselves seemed to vibrate. Rachel suddenly sat upright in bed, her eyes fixed on the far corner of the room. Mason followed her gaze, and felt his heart stop. A woman was standing there, not a shadow, not a reflection. A woman, pale skin, long hair, sunken eyes. The same face from the photograph, the same face from the woods, the same face from every nightmare. For several seconds nobody moved. Then the woman slowly looked down at Rachel's stomach, and smiled. The humming instantly stopped. The room went silent. Then the woman spoke. "The baby was never yours." Before either of them could react, the figure disappeared. Gone. Without a sound. Without a trace. The next morning Rachel went into labor nearly 6 weeks early. Doctors couldn't explain why. But after several tense hours, she gave birth to a healthy baby girl. The delivery was successful. Rachel was safe. The baby was safe. And for the first time in months, everything seemed normal. The voices stopped. The dreams ended. The sightings disappeared. It was finally over. Or at least that's what they believed. 3 years later Mason was organizing old family photos when he discovered something strange. Hidden inside a box of documents was an article he had forgotten about. An article about Project Echo. Attached to it was a photograph recovered from the abandoned facility. The image showed several employees standing together outside one of the buildings. Mason stared at the picture. His blood turned cold, because standing in the front row was the missing pregnant woman. The woman who vanished decades ago. The woman Rachel had seen over and over again. And beside her stood a little girl. No older than 3 years old. A girl who shouldn't have existed. A girl who had supposedly never been born. Mason looked closer, then dropped the photograph onto the floor. The child's face was identical to his daughter. Exactly identical. Same eyes, same smile, same face. Years later, he still keeps that photograph locked away. He has never shown it to his daughter, and he never plans to, because he still remembers the final words spoken by the woman in the cabin. The baby was never yours. And sometimes late at night, when his daughter thinks nobody is watching, she stands at her bedroom window, looking toward the distant mountains, smiling at someone standing in the dark. Have you ever experienced something unexplainable? Let me know in the comments. And if you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe for more terrifying tales. Follow Nightmare Files for more chilling true horror stories. If you have your own scary experience, send it through comments or DM. Your story could be featured in a future video.